Hello, my book family. I hope you're doing great. I hope you're doing fantastic. I love to say fantastic. So, anyways, and I hope where you are gearing up for the holidays, that you've already started doing your decorations, that you're already shopping for your family's gifts and all that stuff. As for me and my family, thank you Almighty, we're doing great, and I have already started decorating as well. My husband is working on the tree, and I just removed my fall decorations, so I will be putting up some cute stuff for Christmas. So in today's video, I wanted to share with you my favorite series. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about this series that has taken over my brain, my heart, and I want to share that with you guys. And before I even get into it, can you guess what that series is? Let me give you a few seconds, because I know if you've been following me, I know you know. And if you don't know, you're probably new here, and you just stumbled on my channel and you're like, what's this all about? Well, I'll tell you all about it, so don't go anywhere. Stay put. We'll be back after the break. All right, welcome to my channel. My name is Chilanda, and this is Library Without Borders. Okay, so as I mentioned, I wanted to talk to you guys about my favorite series. It's not my favorite series of all time, but so far it's at the top. It's the series for me, and I'm gonna try to tell you more about it so I can convince you to pick it up, hopefully. Okay, all right, so that series is, check it out. It's the Lazar Family Saga by Elizabeth Bell. Look, oh my god, aren't they pretty? So I actually finished reading the book, the last installment in the Lazar Family Saga, and boy oh boy was I emotional. I was emotional. I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. I love this author. I mean, she did a thorough job of writing these characters, of researching the history of the enslaved people, of the Aboriginal people, like the original Americans. And the reason why I gravitated towards her books, it was because I am certified in reading books about history. Like, history books is what I gravitate towards, right? So I've read enough historical books, especially slave narratives, to know when she would mention something, I was like, I recall, I remember, oh, I know of this, I know of that. So I knew that what she was talking about, like, I remembered those historical facts. Also, at the end of each book, she tells you how she took 30 years to write these books, but also the characters. Some of them who are real, some of them are slightly based on real characters, and the events that she mentioned, and she tells you she gives you the links on where to find certain information. So I knew she truly put her soul and body and mind into writing this book. So that is why I would love for you guys to encourage this author and pick up her book. So I'm not going to go into too much details in talking about all these books, because 3 of them I've already reviewed. I might just talk a little bit more about it, but I'm so afraid of spoiling it for you guys. So I'm really going to try my best. And if I find myself spoiling it, I'm going to put a timestamp somewhere and let you know that, you know what, this part I'm giving a bit more detail, so skip till whatever, right? So anyways, the first book is obviously Necessary Sins, and it's the first book. In this book, we are introduced to the Lazar family. Essentially, we hear about the dad, we hear about Joseph, Renee, his wife, and we hear about their life. So the main character is obviously gonna be Joseph. Joseph is Renee's child who's aspiring to become a priest. Now, the only thing is he's going through a lot of doubts, because although he wants to become a priest, he's also much aware of his body desires, his carnal desires, and he's also aware of his African ancestry, because it's at the back, so I'm not giving it up. It's in the back. So there's that, and in a time where black people are still very much enslaved. It's Charleston, and I think it's the 1789. That's when the story starts. So you know it's in the full throttle of enslavement. So he's battling, he has that as a secret, and he's also trying to be a priest, and as I said, he's battling all of that. So at the same time, we follow him growing up, going to school, following his priesthood and all that stuff. When he becomes a bit older, you now are introduced to another character who's Tess. Tess is his love interest. And basically, at that point, you're now introduced to a bit of forbidden love, because remember, he's trying to become a priest, and priests cannot marry or cannot have sexual intercourse or any sexual nothing, okay? Apart from that, you also are introduced to a lot of Christian scriptures. So a bit of advice to everyone who wants to pick up this book. You might be turned off by the fact, if you're not too much of a, religious or Christian person, you might be turned off by that aspect. But I am telling you, if you go past the scriptures, you will enjoy the story that will develop between the priest and Tess, okay? And also I want to mention, you have to take in account the reasons why she's talking so much about religion. It is because it's the 1700s. Back then, people were very religious, right? And people were not too much in tune with their bodies. Like, people didn't talk about like sexuality as we talk about it freely today. So when you take the time in which this whole story is taking place, you will know why she wrote the story as she wrote. And one other thing that I want to mention and move on to the next book, because like I said, I've already reviewed these books, is simply the fact that I love the historical factors that she mentioned in each book. She does touch on different parts of history that's happening during the time in which the main story takes place. So I really love that aspect. And in the first book, Tess, like I said, the love interest of Joseph, she does go through a lot of traumatic events. And trigger warning, there is miscarriage here. Okay, so you need to really be mindful of that, because I need to mention it could be very triggering. Like, she does not lose, not one, not two, not three, it's a lot. Okay, it's a lot. Apart from that, there's also a lot of death that happened in the first book, because again, during that time, people were falling sick easily. Certain disease that we now know can be cured just by maybe washing your hands and all that. Back then, people didn't know, you know what I mean? So just be mindful of that. But that's essentially what the first book is all about. Us being introduced to the Lazar family, and mainly to Tess and Joseph. Okay? So this one. Secondly, we have Lost Saints. This is when, okay, without me spoiling it for you guys, is when we are introduced now to that blooming, that the beginning of what started in the first book between Joseph and Tess. This is what this whole book is about. Now, question for you that you need to know once you read, right, is, do these two consummate? Do they consummate that love? Okay, because remember, it's forbidden. That's the trope. Okay, if you're wondering what trope you find in this book, it'll be the forbidden love. Do they consummate that? Oh my God, this book was, I loved it. It was so fantastic. So apart from the fact that we're following their love story in this book, and you find out if they consummate or not, I can't tell you that. We are also introduced to other members of the Lazar family. Notably, we're introduced to David. Now, the story with David, because it does take part in the other half of the story. What happened to David is that his mom, who is the sister of Joseph, married. And I think she married either Scottish or some other European person, and they traveled somewhere else. But what happened is that while they were traveling, she already had David. David was 9 years old. She had Sophie. Sophie was 6, and she was pregnant with a baby boy. But something happens, I think they're attacked while they were traveling by Indians during that time. Because again, you have to take in account So it's during 1840 to 1859. Okay, so they're attacked by Indians there, and something does happen to the father of David. Now he's left with his mom Sophie and the baby. So the mom does give birth. Unfortunately, she falls sick. She's sick, right? So they're in the middle of nowhere, and there's no medical attention. No one can take care of it. But she does give birth to a baby boy. But unfortunately, something does happen. So you are introduced to David's story in the other half of The Lost Saints, okay? And at the same time, while you're finding out about David and how he happens to come to Charleston, because remember, he's away, but he does come back to the Lazar family. But how he finds his way there is, I need you guys to read the book to discover. But that's what happens in the half of this story. So again, I've already talked about this, okay? But yes. And then in the third book, in the third one, is where we actually have more of David's story, and we are now introduced to a third character, okay? And in this book, she does focus a lot on Native and the Indian history, which again, I said I loved it, and I talked about it, and I mentioned how I was sort of heartbroken, because even though I know every time you read about these type of history, it just never ceases to affect you, of how Indians lived in the United States and how they kept being pushed to the brink of extinction. And she does mention different groups of Indians. She really gets into the nitty-gritty of that historical time. That's what I loved. And we, as I mentioned, we are introduced to another character who will come and disrupt the life of the Lazar family in a good way. And David does go away to study in the medical field, basically. Now, the only thing with David is that you find that he is carrying this burden. He is carrying a burden that he does unload while he's talking to Joseph. Remember in the second book when I mentioned that other half, it's him unburdening of that load and speaking to the priest, basically confessing of his sin and what has been weighing him down. Because what you will notice throughout these books, when David is being introduced, is that he's a very quiet kid, even though he's very much friends with Tess's daughter. Remember when I said there's a lot of miscarriage that Tess goes through? There's one kid that survives, okay? So David will befriend, almost become a big brother to that one daughter of Tess, sorry. So yeah, as I mentioned, without wanting to say too much, you are introduced to that third character, and something will develop between that third character and this little girl, Claire. Before you even follow the story with the third character and Claire, you discover of this third character. His name is Esh. I don't want to say too much, okay? So forgive me, but his name is Esh, and you follow him where he grows up. He grows up among Indians. So you have this white Indian, okay? He's all white, but he speaks no English, okay? He ain't white except for his physical appearance, and he's all Indian. You know, he's all he's known is the Indian family where he was brought up. So that's the story that you follow in this book. And lastly, y'all, I'm gonna have to talk about this in my wrap-up video, but it is Sweet Medicine. That's the last book in the Lazar family saga, and it's the story of now Esh, Claire, and David. That's the conclusion in this story. And as I said, this book had all kinds of tropes. Everything. You had multi-generational point of views. You had the trope of forbidden love. You had a trope of miscommunication. I mean, the trope of where the woman is pregnant and falls in love with a man that has no child. If there's a trope, I'm saying that you can find everything in all these 4 books. Now, in this last book, as I said, you follow those 3 characters. The thing with this is that here, what she did I'm going to talk about the historical facts that she mentioned in this book. So here it takes place from 1860 to 1873. So during that time, there are talks of abolishing slavery. And at this point, David, remember, he went to study abroad. Sorry, I forgot to mention in the third book, he went to study in the medical field abroad. I think it was Paris. That's where he was. And while he was in Paris, he was definitely communicating with Claire by letters. So he's come back to Charleston and he wants to work there, and he's already started working there. And in my last wrap up, I do talk about a bit more in details of the third book. So here I'm thinking, I don't know if this is such a trope, but like, how do you call it? A triangle type of trope where there's one character and there's two love interests. See, again, you find this trope in this last one. And I want to give you guys a warning. There's a scene here right at the beginning of the book, literally like the first few pages. We are reintroduced to Claire. I've already talked about Claire. She is Tess's daughter who survived. And something tragic, horrible, terrible happens to her. Like, it's right at the beginning. It will be upsetting to many people. Like, I need to mention it. Like, there's a mention of rape, okay? And not just by anybody, okay? Not just by anybody. So, family member. So, anyways, I'm just gonna say that, but I need to warn you. So, outside of that, you follow Claire trying to try to live through that experience, that horrid experience that has left her broken. And what I love about the author and the way she tackles this aspect of the story, at the end, she does have a message for people who've gone through that traumatic event. And I love that. She's like, you know, like you're more than that. It does not define you. Like she has a whole speech about it at the end of the book, which I really appreciated. But anyway, so she needs to survive that, and she will remember Esh that I mentioned, the third story. It's their story here, but there's also her and David, and then there's her and Esh. So I don't want to say too much, you know. So that's it. Like that's it. Like I don't want to ruin it for you guys, but like I cried. It was really emotional for me because I developed such a love for some of these characters, but also I developed a hate for certain of these characters because that is the reason why they were written. And I want to give Elizabeth Bell her accolades, her applause, because even though we know that during slavery time, okay, we like to believe that almost every white person there was horrid, because if you own slaves, I mean, you are automatically, whether you were born and you had no choice because you were born in that institution, I mean, yeah, you were born into that institution and you did what, you know, you were taught to do, which was mistreat black people, think that they were inferior, think that they were brutes, think everywhere and treat them however you treated them. You know what I mean? So I respect Elizabeth Bell for bringing some white characters into these stories and in a different light. You know what I mean? Because it's easy for all of us to be like, yeah, all of them were just like, you know, but what I appreciate in this last book is that she touched on the Underground Railroad. I love that she got to that. And guess who was actually helping the enslaved people through that Underground Railroad? The priest. You know what I mean? Like, you find everything, if not that, like the fact that this Lazar family had African ancestry and they were basically passing for white. Remember? They were aware of how black people were looked at. And if they were found out that they had African ancestry, you can just imagine, right? I love the way she was able to write white characters and the black characters, the indigenous characters. She did her research. That's why I was not mad at her whenever she wrote a black character. There was some language that she used that were upsetting, but she was trying to be true to how white people back then talked to black people. She used that language of disgracing, but the dehumanizing language that white people then used to talk to black people. And same thing to the Indians, like the way they were mistreated, killed. She talked about it and she explained her research and where it brought her in terms of finding out the traditions, the culture of the Aboriginal people. And there's also another aspect I want to mention that she talks about at the end of her book. She said that in the book, she mentioned Indians eating dogs.
They're eating the dogs.
Sorry, it's going to be upsetting for people. Puppies. And it is a tradition of a certain group of Indian. Back then, we don't know today, but back then, they did eat dogs. And she said the reason why she even put that aspect is because she didn't want to romanticize this whole Indian ideology. You know, she wanted to be true to its tradition and culture. Even though it could be upsetting, she wanted to make sure that she was true to what she was portraying about Indians. And again, it is for us to learn, and it's in that spirit to learn about those cultures and not judge. Okay? Let's not judge. But what else can I say, you guys? Like, what else can I say? I love this series. It was bittersweet for me to have finished it, and I'm just hoping that a lot more read her book. This series, it's for everyone, literally everyone, white, black, indigenous, non-indigenous, Christians, non-Christians. You find something. You will literally find something for yourself. Depending, it doesn't matter if you're not into historical fiction, but like if you're into romance, it's romance. If you're into historical fiction, there's fiction. Obviously there's no mystery, or there's no, I mean, it's thrilling because there is some action. If you love anything set against some kind of war, there's reconstructive periods, Reconstruction War, all of that is mentioned in this book. So there's everything for everybody. So anyways, you guys, I think I'm gonna end this. I don't want this video to be too long, but I'm hoping that I have done an okay job to convince you in picking up these books if you haven't. And if you have, and you started with the first one and maybe you didn't feel inspired to finish, I beseech you to continue. It gets better. It gets good.
It gets better. It gets good.
I mean, this is gonna be my thing. This series was history galore through and through. Now that's my thing, okay?
History galore.
All right, it was good. What can I say? It is a 5-star. This series is a complete 5-star for me. It brought everything that I've learned, that I've read, my passion, everything. She just brought it full circle. I'm done. I'm gonna finish this, and again, yes, just yes, it's a yes.
I'm gonna say yes. 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 It's a yes. Yes. Obviously, yes.
It's a yes. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to like, to comment, to share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Ciao. Bye.